The fluorescent lights of Rosie's diner flickered as Sarah Martinez wiped down the cracked vinyl booth for what felt like the 100th time that evening. Her feet ached in her worn sneakers, the ones she'd resoled twice because new ones weren't in the budget. Not when her daughter Emma needed physical therapy 3 times a week. Not when the medical bills stacked up faster than she could count them. At 32, Sarah looked older. Worry had etched lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. But she smiled anyway, because that's what you did when you were fighting to keep your family afloat. She smiled because giving up wasn't an option, when a 6-year-old girl was counting on you to make everything okay. The evening rush had just ended when they walked in. 3 men in suits so expensive, they seemed to shimmer under the diner's harsh lighting. Their watches caught the light, flashing gold and silver, probably worth more than Sarah made in a year. Maybe 2 years. They chose the corner booth, the one that always wobbled no matter how many folded napkins Sarah wedged under the leg, and they talked loudly about deals and stocks and vacation, homes in places Sarah had only seen in magazines. "Good evening, gentlemen." Sarah approached with menus and her practiced smile, the one that hid the exhaustion. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man in the center, silver-haired with a tan that screamed country club membership, barely glanced up. "Scotch, top shelf. And make it quick, we don't have all night." His companions ordered similarly, their voices carrying that particular tone of people who'd never had to wonder if they could afford groceries that week. Sarah nodded, bringing them their drinks, taking their orders. 3 prime rib dinners, the most expensive items on Rosie's modest menu, and trying to ignore how one of them snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. Throughout their meal, Sarah refilled drinks, brought extra bread, ensured everything was perfect. She'd learned long ago that good service sometimes meant swallowing your pride. Bills didn't care about dignity. "Excuse me, miss," the silver-haired man said when she brought the check. His eyes were cold, assessing. This steak was overcooked. Sarah's heart sank. She'd checked with them twice during the meal. Both times they'd said everything was perfect. "I'm so sorry, sir. You mentioned it was fine when I—" "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice rose, sharp and cutting. The diner had gone quiet. Other customers were watching now. "No, sir, The service here has been terrible," one of his friends chimed in, leaning back with a smirk. "Slow, inattentive. Honestly, we shouldn't have to pay for this experience." The third man nodded, crossing his arms. "I agree. This is unacceptable." Sarah felt her face flush. In 5 years of waitressing, she'd never received a complaint. She worked harder than anyone, stayed later, covered shifts when others called in sick. "Gentlemen, I'm happy to speak with my manager about a discount, but—" "We're not paying," the silver-haired man said flatly. He stood, his companions following suit. "Consider it a lesson in proper service." "But," Sarah's voice cracked, the bill was over $200. If they walked out, it would come out of her paycheck. That was this week's therapy session for Emma. That was the electric bill. "Please, I have a daughter." "Not our problem," one of them said, already heading toward the door. Sarah felt tears prickling her eyes, hot and humiliating. She wanted to scream, to chase them down, to demand they do the right thing. But what could she do? They were already laughing as they pushed through the door, their expensive shoes clicking on the pavement outside. "I'll cover it." The voice came from behind her, quiet and steady. Sarah turned to find an older man rising from a booth near the window. She hadn't noticed him come in. He was dressed simply in jeans and a plain blue button-down, nothing like the peacocks who'd just strutted out. His face was weathered but kind, with deep smile lines around his eyes. "You don't have to—" Sarah started, but her voice broke. "I know I don't have to," he said gently, "but I'd like to. Those men should be ashamed of themselves." He pulled out his wallet, extracting enough cash to cover their bill and adding a generous tip. "For you. You handled that with more grace than they deserved." Sarah couldn't stop the tears now. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means." The man smiled. "Maybe I do." "What's your name?" Sarah Martinez." "It's nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Robert." He glanced at his watch. "Is your shift almost over?" She nodded, confused by the question. "Would you mind sitting with me for a moment? I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share it." Something in his eyes was trustworthy, genuine. Sarah found herself nodding, sliding into the booth across from him after pouring them both coffee. And somehow, with this stranger who'd shown her unexpected kindness, the words came tumbling out. She told him about Emma, about the car accident 2 years ago that had taken her husband and left her daughter with injuries that required ongoing treatment. She talked about the insurance that hadn't covered everything, about working double shifts, about the fear that kept her awake at 3 in the morning. When she calculated bills in her head, Robert listened without interrupting, his full attention on her in a way that felt rare and precious. When she finished, embarrassed by how much she'd revealed, he was quiet for a long moment. "You love her very much," he finally said. "Your daughter." "She's everything," Sarah said simply. Robert nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. Sarah picked it up, her eyes widening as she read the name. "Robert Chen, CEO, Chen Industries." She couldn't finish the sentence. Chen Industries was everywhere. Tech, real estate, pharmaceuticals. Robert Chen was one of the richest men in the country. "In the world. I am," he said with a slight smile. "But right now, I'm just a man who had a nice conversation with a hard-working mother who deserves better than being treated like those men treated you." "I don't understand," Sarah said, her hands shaking slightly. "I come to places like this sometimes," Robert explained. "Quiet diners where no one recognizes me, where I can see how people really are, when they don't think anyone important is watching." His expression grew serious. "Those men? I know who they are. They work for one of my competitors, and the way they treated you tells me everything. I need to know about the culture of that company." He leaned forward. "But you, Sarah, you showed compassion even when you were being mistreated. You held on to your dignity. You work hard for someone you love. Those are the kinds of values I try to build my companies around." Sarah's heart was pounding. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'd like to help if you'll let me. I have a foundation that assists families dealing with medical hardships. Emma's therapy, her medical bills, we can help with those. And there's an administrative position opening up at one of my companies here in town. Better pay, benefits, regular hours. If you're interested." Sarah couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Robert said kindly. "Let someone help you for a change. You've been carrying this alone for too long." The tears came again, but this time they were different. Relief, hope, disbelief, all mixed together. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, thank you." Robert smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Good. Someone from my office will contact you tomorrow." He stood, leaving several $100s on the table. "For your manager, to make sure you don't get in any trouble about tonight." As he headed toward the door, Sarah called out, "Mr. Chen, why did you really do this?" He paused, turning back. 25 years ago, I was working 3 jobs, trying to keep my family fed after my parents died. A stranger helped me when they didn't have to, paid for my mother's funeral, helped me get into college. I never forgot that kindness." His eyes were distant, remembering. "We all need someone to believe in us sometimes. Sarah, to see us when we feel invisible. Those men tonight, they'll never understand that the measure of a person isn't in their bank account. It's in how they treat someone who can do nothing for them." After he left, Sarah sat in the empty booth, holding the business card like it might disappear if she let go. The other customers had gone back to their meals, the drama over. But for Sarah, everything had changed. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of Chen Industries, waiting for the elevator in her new professional clothes. A photo of Emma smiling, widely, walking without assistance for the first time, clutched in her hand. She still worked hard, but now she came home at reasonable hours. Now Emma had the care she needed. Now they could breathe. She'd learned that the 3 men who'd refused to pay had been quietly let go from their company, after their behavior somehow reached the ears of their board. She didn't know if Robert had anything to do with that, and she never asked. What she did know was that kindness was a currency, more valuable than any amount of money. That being seen, truly seen, could change someone's life. That sometimes angels wore jeans and button-down shirts and sat in quiet diners, watching, caring, remembering what it felt like to need help. And she knew that someday, when she was on solid ground, she'd pay it forward. She'd be the one watching, the one helping, the one reminding someone else that they weren't invisible, that their struggle mattered, that hope wasn't lost, because that's what humanity was supposed to be. Not the cruelty of those who had everything and gave nothing, but the grace of those who remembered what it meant to have nothing and chose to give anyway.